Hello, everyone, and welcome to Kilowatt, a podcast about electric vehicles, renewable energy, autonomous driving, and much, much more. My name is Bodie, and I am your host. And do you know what's better than having friends? And I'm just going to be real honest here. I value having friends. It's up super high in my values, the things that I hold sacred. So what's better than having friends? Having friends who do podcasts and who want to offer you free content. That's way better than just having random pedestrian friends. Like, all my other friends suck, but you know who doesn't suck? Allison and Steve Sheridan and Pat Dangler. They really came through on today's episode because I didn't have to do anything except for record an intro and an outro. And I love it. About a week and a half ago, Allison says to me, she's like, hey, I think I've got some content you'd be interested in. Pat Dangler had an issue with her Tesla wall connector where it wasn't charging like it should. So I don't want to give the whole chat away because honestly, everything's explained. So put your hands together for Pat, Allison, and Steve.
I have two guests with me this week for an interview that's going to go onto two shows. You're going to be hearing this possibly on the NosillaCast, or you might be hearing this on Bodie Grimm's wonderful Kilowatt podcast. I'm going to do introductions just in case people don't know the players, depending on where they're coming from. I have the most awesome Pat Dangler, who is an Apple certified consultant and a happy Tesla owner. How are you doing today, Pat?
Hey, Allison.
And I've also got Steve Sheridan, my husband and videographer and producer of my show. How are you doing today, Steve?
Hi, Allison. Thanks for having me on.
I've heard somebody refer to you as my pocket electrical engineer, and that is going to be part of your task today. In case Pat or I get something messed up in the description of what happened here. So
I'll do my best.
Okay. So Pat, you have a Tesla and you got that around July of 2022, right?
Correct. Yes.
And
so almost.
And when you bought that car, you had a home wall charger installed right around the same time?
Yes.
All right.
I had hired my electrician, a really nice fellow named Patrick.
All right,
who,
good.
So let me jump in already.
Steve is here to correct things.
So this is a Tesla wall connector, to be technically correct.
Right.
So it's supplied by Tesla. It's not a third party. And it's a connector, not a charger, because it just simply provides the house power into your car, in which the charger is built in.
The charger is built into the car?
Correct. So it's just supplying AC power to your car. Your car does the conversion from AC to DC and to charge the battery. But everyone calls it a wall charger, so I'm fine just staying with that.
I think Tesla's term is wall connector.
Yeah. Wall connector.
Wall connector.
That's what's on the bottom.
Which do we want to call it? Because it's going to be important.
More people will know it as a wall charger.
Okay. All right. We may call it different things. So I believe the one that you chose was the Generation 3 wall charger.
Correct.
All right. So the story is going to get interesting. We're just trying to lay down the facts here to get started. All right. When you have a wall charger or wall connector connected, any kind of a charger for your electric vehicle into your home, it kind of matters how much amperage you can supply to the circuit in your home to be able to supply to the car. Yeah. Did I say anything stupid yet, Steve?
Yeah, well, it's both current, it's both voltage and amperage. So the wall connector or charger supplies is designed to work off 240 volts and many different amperages up to 60 amps.
Okay. So, Pat, how many amps? So I said amperage. I probably should have said current. Same thing, but you'll hear us say amps quite a bit here. So, Pat, how many amps is your circuit? Do you know?
Steve?
So Pat has a 50 amp circuit, meaning there's a 50 amp circuit breaker that supplies 240 volts to that wall connector, that wall charger.
So why is that important, Steve?
Well, that determines the maximum amount of current that you can continuously provide to your car to charge it. And because of some rating and safety margin, you can provide up to 80% of the circuit breaker's rating. So a 50 amp circuit breaker can provide 40 amps of continuous power to your car. That's different than some types of circuits that don't continuously use the power, but an EV is the most demanding type of load on a circuit breaker because it runs for hours at the full current.
So the reason this is important, how many amps you have in the circuit, is because it's going to define how quickly you can charge your car. Now, we're going to use as our frame of reference only Teslas, but you might get different mileage depending on which, different speeds of charging depending on which vehicle you have. And it's even different between a Model 3 and a Model Y and a Model S and a Model X. So we're kind of going to just talk in a middle range here. Normally, with a 50 amp circuit where you're getting 40 amps, Pat, do you remember how much you normally get, what speed it says in the car? Like how many miles per hour of range are you getting to add with that?
So I don't exactly. I look in the app and it tells me that I get 9 kilowatts, 9 kilowatts specifically. When I have it charged at, I set it to 40 amps. Now, I wasn't before. It would let me go up to 48 amps. It still does, actually. But I learned from Steve that wasn't a good thing. So now I bring that down at home to 40 amps and I'm getting 9 kilowatts in the, what it shows. And I can tell you that probably in about an hour, I'm going to roughly math this. It's about 6% an hour of charge.
Okay, let me jump us to what we know, which is we normally don't we get around 25 or 30 miles per hour of charge, Steve, at home on a 40 effective 40 amp circuit?
It's about 34 miles per hour of charge.
Okay.
34 to 35. And that should be comparable to Pat's as well, since she also has a Model Y.
Okay.
Yeah.
So you can see how much instantaneous power it's drawing, which is that 9 kilowatts you're talking about.
Yep.
Okay, so all this has been the setup to everything's been going great.
By the way, it's 9.6, and you just get that by multiplying the 240 volts times the 40 amps. You get 9.6 kilowatts.
Oh,
okay.
That's how much power is flowing into your car.
Okay. I told you it was good. We were going to have adult supervision on this, Pat. So a few weeks ago, Pat texts us and says that her charger isn't working. What was the symptom? What did you notice that something was amiss?
So I normally have been plugging in my Tesla at night, and the app is set to automatically start charging at midnight. And I'm lucky enough to have solar panels and a Tesla battery. So it pulls from the battery. And when it needs more, which it does, because it only gets 5 kilowatts from the battery at any one moment, and it usually pulls around 10-ish. So the balance it gets then from the grid. And overnight, it'll deplete the battery to, whatever the maximum I allow it to deplete. And then the rest it gets from the grid. And usually by morning, my car is charged up to the 80% maximum that I have it set to charge to fill the battery. Well, this morning in particular, I opened the app and it said that instead of charging at 40 amps, it was 21 or so.
Oh.
And I looked and my car was not charged up to 80%, which is really unexpected. I was looking and I thought, well, everything is connected properly. I checked the breakers that nothing had, flipped or anything. And I thought, let me restart is always the first response that I do.
Turn it off on again.
Yeah. So I actually flipped the breakers for the charger and then flipped them back on again after I had unplugged the car first, just to be sure. So I flipped them on, waited a breath, flipped them back on again. And now I was getting 0. The wall charger was not working at all.
Oh, wow.
It was blinking red lights. And when I went to troubleshoot this first in the app, the instruction was to figure out the pattern of the lights. And I found that blinking red light was the answer. And and it was a drop-down menu that you can go through that says, okay, is it, what are the lights doing? It's blinking 3 times. Okay. And then you continue to choose a couple more questions it asks.
This is all in the app?
This is all in the app, yeah. And in the end, it basically said, call your electrician.
So you called Steve.
So I called Steve, yes.
And I am not an electrician.
Well, but you get an understanding of what was possibly going on.
Yeah, and to see how I could possibly fix this thing because, in my estimation, it wasn't that old and there wasn't any indication that it shouldn't, be working, that it didn't get hit by anything. Everything else in the house is working fine. So.
Yeah. So Steve, in addition to being an electrical engineer and just darn interested in this kind of stuff and studies it, he also is pretty active in the Tesla Motor Club forums where he's got a lot of contacts. He knows a lot of what people have talked about. So you did some research at that point, or had you already heard stuff about this?
I've seen many posts about Tesla wall chargers, wall connectors that have gone bad. And many of them are pretty ugly, and some of them are downright scary in terms of fire hazard to the house. So because of these scare stories, I was concerned about maybe Pat was experiencing a similar problem where this is common. If they're not installed quite correctly, fire can be caused by the contacts and the wires not being bolted down with sufficient torque. They really need a strong contact. The wires that come in that feed the 240 volts contact a couple connectors, and the bolts need to be so many foot-pounds of torque. If you don't have that, because the electricity is 60 hertz, it actually can vibrate if they're loose, and they can vibrate loose, causing arcing, causing heat. Heat causes more resistance, which is a feedback loop. So that causes more heat, and they can catch on fire. They can burn up.
Before I knew all that part, after Steve had said in our text message thread, he said, well, I've heard that if it's not, they're not torqued down to this 50 foot-pounds, you really, you can run into this problem. And I know Pat's super handy. And, as a mechanical engineer, it sounds great. Pop the cover off, Pat, torque them down. And Steve writes back, no, don't touch it. Basically, well, don't have anything. I had no idea what we were really talking about and the danger that could have been involved.
So this is a judgment call. This is something that I'm sure Pat could do and I could do, but for things that fire safety critical, I like to have a professional do it, someone who's authorized and trained to do this properly. And I don't think I have a torque wrench that will be able to do that. Maybe you do, Pat.
I do.
Yeah, Pat's got every tool in the world.
Still, we're not even sure that was the problem. I just kind of assumed it was. So I passed it on to Pat. But Pat, I think, did the right thing. And maybe you should pick it up from here.
So I emailed my electrician, Patrick, and I said, here's the situation. And this is the suggested next step from Tesla was to, check the connection and tighten it down appropriately. And he emailed back saying, I'd love to help. I'm about to go out of town for a week. But I've seen this problem before, and you should contact Tesla because this could be a faulty wall connector, a wall charger. So I thought, all right, he's got this experience. So in this case, every time I've had a conversation with Tesla, it's been through a chat, a text
inside
message
the app,
thread.
Right?
No, well, inside messages.
Oh,
whenever I've talked to them about anything, sales, follow up for a repair, and obviously I've reached different people. So I thought I'll start there. So I sent a message and crickets. I didn't hear anything back. So within the app, there was a contact me, and it was to send an email. So I sent an email. And then they requested photographs of the wall connector as it sat on my wall, the face-on photo of the handle coming from the wall connector, and a face-on view of the receptacle in my car, the charging receptacle in the car. So I sent all 3 pictures off. And then they wanted, the additional thing they wanted were the identifying numbers from my wall connector. And I forget the abbreviation, a TSN number or something like that, I think. And I could get that unique code that was on the side of the wall connector. It was in my paperwork and so on. And I sent those off, and they came back relatively quickly and said, it appears your wall connector is faulty, and we're going to send you a replacement, and then you just send us back the old one, no charge. And
well, wait,
they
did you in your wildest dreams expect that Tesla would take ownership, say it was their problem, and send you a free one?
No, after a year and a half of sitting in place and working, no, I expected, this was going to be on me.
Yeah,
So I was elated. And the additional bit of good news, because, electricians are not cheap, is it included instructions on how to do it yourself. And it said specifically, no electrician needed to do the install. So I was happy about that. And I got the tracking number relatively quickly. And a couple days later, I saw that the box was going to arrive. And I thought, well, your suggestion, maybe Steve might enjoy coming over to help me on this endeavor.
So what did they actually send you? So when you look at a Tesla wall connector, you see a white outer part that has the little lights that go up and down to show you that electricity is flowing. And then there's the handle on the side. And then there's kind of a black part that's bolted to the wall, and apparently mysterious electronics inside, because I've never seen the inside.
Yes, they sent me an entire wall charger as if I was buying a new one.
Oh,
not just the part I needed to replace. So the panel that attaches to the wall and the wires coming from the house attached to that panel. And then it has a couple of metal phalanges. I don't know what you would call them.
clips?
But essentially, it's the part of the wall connector that everybody sees, the big white part that has the cable attached to it, is basically just plugs into that wall connector. So the only screws you need are to keep it in place from falling off. The
electronics are in that outer cover piece, not in the part that's bolted to the wall and connected up to the big scary wires from your house.
Right. The dangerous scary wires are made available to that white connector piece by these little,
phalanges.
Phalanges.
Yeah, phalanges. little
It sounds like
metal.
Phoebe would be proud.
Yeah,
exactly.
And it basically entailed unscrewing 2 hex bolts at the top and 2 underneath at the bottom, and just pulling it off the wall and putting the new one on and screwing back those bolts into place. And Bob's your uncle, you're done.
And the reason you don't need an electrician here is because those big old 240 volt cables that need the 50 foot-pounds of torque, they don't move. They're assuming those are okay because apparently, and this is amazing, Tesla can sense a fault remotely from that wall connector. I think they have the ability to hold it in some fashion, assuming it has power, and get some data from it. Either that or they just assume it went bad, but I don't know how they would assume that. For instance, if it did have the burned out wire condition, we would not have been able to replace that, because that would require a reconnection of those 240 volt cables. So they knew that it would just require the front plate with the electronics, which, as Pat described, is pretty easy to unbolt and put in the new one, and it just plugs in.
I think the reason I wanted to have Pat and Steve tell this story is because there's certainly been enough publicity lately about some mistakes Tesla's making, in many of our opinions, and to have a good news story. I mean, it's not good news that it failed, but I think the second best thing to stuff that works forever is when a company stands behind a product and gets it fixed for you really quickly and doesn't give you a bunch of hassle about it. Apple, sorry, I've been having trouble with them. and and did it for you and did it for you for free and gave you instructions, and it didn't cost you any money. You couldn't charge your car for about a week at home, but you have a lot of other alternatives, right?
Yeah, well, I use the what do you call it? The travel charger, the charger that I was lucky enough to have included in my car, so that I could plug it into a normal 110 outlet. So that was very slow, but it was better to have that than nothing, or have to find a supercharger somewhere and pay extra.
I think it's 6 miles an hour. Is that right, Steve?
I mean, the mobile charger has different adapters you can put on it, which will account for different voltages and currents. But if you're plugging into a regular 15 amp, 110 volt outlet, you're going to get 3 to 5 miles per hour of charge.
I want to say it was closer to the 3 mile an hour range.
6 would have been awesome, huh? Yeah, we have an adapter, Steve, that will let us plug it into 210, 220. Is that right?
Yeah, 220, 240, whatever it takes.
Yeah, I was just waiting for it. So 220, then that's like a dryer outlet, and you have to be specific about the connector shape, right? The 220 comes in a bunch of different shapes.
Well, the specific one we're talking about is a 30 amp 220 volt or 240 volt connector. So it does have, it's a keyed plug. All of them are. These are standards. So this one that we use when we go to Lindsay and Nolan's is 30 amps to 220 volts. Yeah, and that charges at about 22 miles per hour of charge.
So that works out really well for us because they've got a dryer that's right outside of the driveway, and we suck their solar panels dry. We don't feel too guilty because we helped them pay for the solar panels, so we we don't mind doing it. But it works out well because we're there for a couple of days, and by the time we leave, we have enough charge to get back home. And that's using that same travel charger. But Steve did have to buy those adapters, and it bothers me a little bit that you have to have this electrical engineering background or a very practical understanding of electronics and circuitry of electricity in a house in order to know which one to buy and how to do that.
Yeah, I think a lot of people don't necessarily have that, but they study up quickly to find out what they need, because you're going to spend $30-$35 a pop for each one of those adapters, and you don't want to buy the wrong one.
And then
luckily they're all shaped uniquely. So if you just have a good picture of the outlet or the plug, you can find out which one to buy pretty easily.
I remember we were going to see our friends Dean and Suzanne out in Utah, and Steve was making Dean crawl behind a cabinet to get pictures of his 220 outlet in his house so that we could make sure we had the right adapter for his house. He also bought a little Y adapter to plug into the 220 outlet that gives you 2 more. Basically, it's a port multiplier, right, for 2 more 220 connectors, and then an A/B switch to go between them, because everybody got tired of us unplugging the dryer and then have it plug the dryer back in and plug the car back in behind a dryer. And now there's a big switch out in front that lets us share the plug.
So it's important to know this doesn't let you power both of them simultaneously. It's one or the other, and that's what the switch is.
Right. Well, thanks, Pat, for telling us about this. I think it was an interesting story, and I liked learning from Steve all the different things that it could have been. Turned out it wasn't the worst case scenario, which is awesome. And that Tesla really came through for you, and working through an app where you never even had to talk to anybody on the phone is pretty cool, I think.
Yeah, definitely. And they were, by email, they were very responsive, so that was nice as well.
Well, very good. Well, here's to happy charging, and thank you for both joining me to tell the story. I think it's fun to once in a while have a good news story about Tesla.
Yes, absolutely. Thanks for having me.
Thank you.
Now, after you listen to that, you know why I say, it's better than having friends who will create content for your show without even being asked. That's better than having friends. So thank you again to Pat, Allison, and Steve for creating this content and then letting us use it here on the show and share it with the folks who listen to the show. It is nice to hear when a company does right by their customers. And Tesla probably still, but in the past, had a really good reputation for going above and beyond for their customers. And we're hearing a little less of that as they get to be a bigger company. And maybe it's not as sustainable as when they were smaller because there are more customers that they have to interact with. And that personalized touch maybe falls by the wayside a little bit. But I will say, anytime that I've interacted with a Tesla service person, they've all been fantastic. I have no complaints about my interactions with Tesla folks. Okie doke. That is it for today's episode. I hope you all enjoyed it. If you want to email me, you can do so. Bodie, BODIE at 918digital.com. You can also find me on Twitter at 918digital. I hope you all had a wonderful last couple of days since I spoke with you last, and I will talk to you soon.